The Assembly will hear a statement by His Excellency Charles Salvai Tabimasmas, Prime Minister of the Republic of Vanuatu. May I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I have great pleasure in welcoming the Prime Minister of the Republic of Vanuatu, His Excellency Charles Salvai Tabimasmas, and I invite him to address the General Assembly.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, it's a great honor for me to make this statement on behalf of the government and the people of Vanuatu. I join in with other speakers in congratulating His Excellency Mr. Miroslav Lajčák on assuming the presidency of the 72nd General Assembly of the United Nations. In my capacity as Vice President, elected by this august body, we welcome the opportunity to work in close cooperation with you and looking forward to being guided by you throughout the session. Please be assured of the full support of my delegation. I would like to also pay tribute to His Excellency Mr. Peter Thomson, thank him for his vision, his leadership, and his commitment throughout his mandate as President of the 71st session. Please allow me to also express my deep gratitude to the Secretary General, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his wonderful leadership up until to date. On behalf of the people of Vanuatu, I would like to express my heartfelt condolences to the victims of the earthquake in Mexico, to the victims of the hurricanes Maria and Irma, which devastated the Caribbean, and to the victims of the Hurricane Harvey, which ravaged Texas. Mr. President, my delegation welcomes the topic of the 72nd session of the General Assembly, focusing on people striving for peace and a decent life for all on a sustainable planet. This is a theme which is at the same time timely and necessary. It is timely because when we look around us, we see a world in the midst of conflicts and political trouble. We are witnessing an escalation and a rise of extremism and violence resulting from racism, xenophobia, hostility and intolerance. And this theme is necessary because we need to remember that the human being and sustainable future is at the heart of the 2030 agenda. Mr. President, today, 72 years after the United Nations came into being, we still have doubts. When is it that all of the nations, rich and poor, all of the people of all races will be able to live together in peace and embrace their diversity and practice tolerance? We wonder when it will be that the conflicts and wars will be a phenomenon of the past. At one point in the course of during the recent 72 years, we failed to ensure that the United Nations is a force for social and economic development and for the promotion of peace and security throughout the world. The world continues to be confronted with challenges of both economic and political nature, and the global economy continues showing low rates of growth. The gross global product is estimated to grow by some 2.7% in 2017. This is economic stabilization. This is not the kind of growth that the world seeks. Growing terrorism, violent extremism, asymmetrical wars and political instability throughout the world have reached an unprecedented level in 2017, and they continue threatening the economic prospects of many a region. Mr. President, Vanuatu continues to be seriously concerned by the vast refugee and migrant flows. Many of them flee violent conflicts, disasters and poverty. In 2016, 65 million people were forcibly displaced throughout the world. The exodus towards cities and a high rate of urbanization also represents challenges at the national level. We note with a great deal of concern that there is a clear link between this global crisis and the lack of respect for the principles of the responsibility to protect and preventing mass atrocities in Syria, in Iraq and Yemen, in South Sudan, to name but a few. As a small island state exposed to the rising sea level, which will submerge our isles and force our people to seek refuge, I would like to appeal to the entire international community to mobilize its efforts and start considering an international legal framework capable of resolving the issue of climate change refugees from small island states. Mr. President, as a small island state in the Pacific, Vanuatu is a staunch partisan of an international regime based on the rules governing the relationship of states with each other, which are based on fairness and transparency, on which economic development can be based, and peace and security are maintained. It is for this reason that we believe in the United Nations. The United Nations remain for us the best hope and catalyst for peace and security, both regionally and globally. I'd like to underscore the valuable work and the potential carried out by this body in order to lift millions of people from poverty and promote and protect human rights and to create the international world that we're witnessing in the world today. However, in order to remain relevant, it is necessary to carry out strategic reforms. Mr. President, being a permanent member of Security Council is more over a responsibility than a privilege. It is incumbent, therefore, for the Council to move beyond the political interests of its members and to try and find compromise solutions. It's essential to ensure that the Security Council respects the goals, principles, and the pledges contained in the United Nations Charter. We support the reforms of the Security Council which reflect the current geopolitical trends and provide for a more fair regional representation, as well as a reform of the PKOs within the UN in order to enable us to better prevent and resolve conflicts in the world and to better protect civilians. My government welcomes the report by the Secretary General on repositioning the UN development system within the prospect of the 2030 Agenda. I am particularly comforted by the fact that the report underscores the need to have accountability and coordination procedures to make them more robust within the UN system and to realign them in order to enable us better meet the efforts made by countries in order to implement a 2030 agenda. At the beginning of this year, we launched our National Sustainable Development Plan by 2030. It's called the People's Plan, and it encompasses the Sustainable Development Goals. We know that the road we will need to cover in order to implement this roadmap of ours will be a difficult one given the structural weaknesses, the extreme weather phenomenon, frequent earthquakes, external economic shocks. For 4 consecutive years, the annual risk reports in the world placed Vanuatu with the countries which are most exposed to disasters. To make matters worse, the General Assembly of the United Nations decided to graduate Vanuatu from the LDC's status. Unfortunately, the fact that we are no longer an LDC does not eliminate our vulnerabilities and our structural obstacles. My government calls on the United Nations to ensure that the changement of the status of the country does not upset or hinder our development. The measures in place supporting the countries graduating from LDCs are insufficient for the countries. The transition mechanism, we think, needs to be strengthened. Instead of completely lifting the LDC status, we call on the United Nations to continue granting us the LDC status. We also call upon our development partners and aid agencies to consider gradually reducing development assistance. We need to have clear provisions on reducing the trade advantages for the LDC within bilateral agreements and also within WTO. Mr. President, my government is also concerned by the threats to peace and security existing in the Asia-Pacific region. The missile program, the provocations by North Korea, is a violation of a resolution of the Security Council and represents an unprecedented threat for the security in the region and throughout the world. We most strongly condemn the recent series of missile launches, and we are with the international community. We also urge the North Korean administration to put an end to its nuclear and missile development program. We also call upon the United Nations to find common ground with North Korea and to use dialogue in order to find a peaceful solution here. Mr. President, my government reaffirms its commitment to the denuclearization of the Pacific. And we welcome the treaty adopted by the Conference on Negotiating a Legally Binding Instrument on Banning Nuclear Weapons. We reaffirm our commitment to complete nuclear disarmament. Mr. President, the report on regionalism published recently by the Secretariat of the Pacific Island Forum provides the geopolitical views on the trends, threats, and the opportunities for regional development and political aspirations. It contains strategies that members of the forum can use in order to build the Pacific region into an entity which is stronger, more resilient. In the Pacific, we do know how important it is to work together, because it is through standing united that we are stronger and we can arrive at positive results. Similarly, actions is carried out by the United Nations are more decisive when the members stand together. Our understanding, Mr. President, of the signs of climate change has become deeper recently, and we all know its devastating impact. The horrible earthquake in Mexico, the hurricanes Maria and Irma in the Caribbean, Harvey in Texas, and the tropical hurricane Palm, which devastated Vanuatu in 2015, are warnings issued by Mother Nature, telling us that the climate is changing at a rate which is faster than our efforts to deal with it. Resolving a problem which took centuries to arise requires a deeper thought from us and more effort. By collectively reducing the pace at which we emit greenhouse gases, we can make a major difference. We can limit the rise of temperature to less than 1.5 degrees Celsius. We can change the chemistry of oceans. We can manage the rising of the sea levels and avoid disasters for future generations. We urge all member states to continue, and we urge the United States to review its decision to stand with the world and to implement the Paris Agreement on climate change. Mr. President, my country is very worried by climate change, and we are committed to reversing the decline of the health of our oceans. The UN Conference on the Oceans in June here in New York enables us to see that the quality of our oceans, which contributes to our livelihoods, has been seriously compromised. And this requires urgent and immediate attention on our part, and now more so than ever. For us who live in island nations surrounded by vast ocean, we know very well the importance of this issue, and we're seriously worried about the health of the oceans because it has an immediate impact on humankind. My government is determined to implement the resolutions of the conference, in particular the SDG 14 by 2030, thanks to partnerships and our national effort. We are determined to implement our national objectives and to reach our goal of 100% renewable energy by 2030, to do this with the support of our development partners. We now launched our national policy on the oceans, but we also ban the use of to ban the use of plastic bags by 2018, so as to reduce the quantity of debris in the ocean. During the Forum of our leaders in Samoa, I launched in a appeal to other island states to join Vanuatu in our fight and be more responsible in preserving the blue Pacific Ocean. Our government remains fully committed to the implementation of our National Sustainable Development Plan, We have started translating our goals into specific action. My government pledges to present our national voluntary outcome in mid-2018. We'll show our progress and also our failures as we implement Sustainable Development Goals. And we will be welcoming a partnership in order to implement the SDGs. Mr. President, Vanuatu is convinced that in order to end poverty, we need to provide greater opportunities to everyone, in particular to women, and to make education, nutrition and health more accessible. My government undertakes to eliminate the barriers which disproportionately hit the most vulnerable. We've launched successfully our national policies on the equality of the sexes and on the protection of our children, and did this in November 2016. Both take into account the violence and discrimination against women and girls, as well as the neglect, exploitation, abuse, and violence against children. We're also aware that a balanced and equitable distribution of resources and the needed infrastructure in our provinces will help them develop and will allow the reduction of poverty. Mr. President, my government is determined to have a peaceful, fair and inclusive society and to have responsive institutions capable of providing quality services to our citizens. We work with our partners, our development partners, in order to improve the resilience of adaptation capacity of our people to climate change and natural disasters. My government is committed to undertake structural reform and to ensure political and economic stability based on lasting and equitable growth in order to create jobs and ensure the future of our citizens. We express our gratitude to our traditional development partners for their contribution to the economic development of my country. We are ready for new partnerships in order to stimulate our productive sectors and infrastructure. My government, Mr. President, is worried to note that the UN has lost a lot of its capacity and will to implement Resolution 1514 of 14th December 1960, which expressed the need to put an end swiftly and unconditionally to colonialism in all of its forms and manifestations. Ending colonialism has to reappear on the UN radar, and all efforts in this regard have to be free of international political pressure. We all have a collective responsibility to guarantee self-determination to people who are under colonial yoke. Mr. President, we firmly believe that territorial disputes has to be resolved by peaceful means and while respecting the cultural heritage and abiding by the United Nations conventions and the requirements on the international law of the sea. In this regard, I would like to state that Vanuatu recently experienced cases of incursion in Vanuatu areas which are under dispute. This is not in line with the UN principles, nor is it in line with the requirements of the law of the sea. Mr. President, for half a century now, the international community has been witnessing a gamut of torture, murder, exploitation, sexual violence, arbitrary detention inflicted on the nationals of West Papua, perpetrated by in Indonesia. But the international community turned a deaf ear to the appeals for help. We urge the Human Rights Council to investigate these cases. We also call on our counterparts throughout the world to support the legal right of West Papua to self-determination and to jointly with Indonesia put an end to all kinds of violence and find common ground with the nationals to facilitate putting together a process which will enable them to freely express their choice. Mr. President, I would like to get back to the principles in the Charter of the United Nations to reaffirm that we believe in the fundamental rights of human beings, in dignity and worth of the human person, and in equality of rights between men and women and nations large and small. I think that all have an obligation to work together in order to lift the economic, trade and financial embargo imposed on the Republic of Cuba. Lifting these restrictions will allow, inter alia, to the Cuban people to realize their human rights. Mr. President, new Caledonia is now at a critical phase in its history. They will soon decide their future because the referendum of 2018 is soon approaching. We thank all of the countries, as well as France, who supported this process. We urge the administrating power to ensure that the referendum is fair and transparent and that the will of the people be honored. We also call upon France to facilitate the process of self-determination, make sure it's fair and transparent in French Polynesia. To conclude, Mr. President, at this just starting 72nd session of the United Nations General Assembly, let us work together and pursue the specific goal of rising with wisdom to the numerous challenges of today for the common good of humankind. God bless the United Nations. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Republic of Vanuatu for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency.